I don't have all the answers. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe nuclear is just not as sexy as wind and solar. But I mean, I definitely think the math is in your favor. If you want abundant electricity, definitely look at nuclear. So I think we make a great partner to the clean energy movement, and I would love if we could, generate some excitement around nuclear technology.
Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Olajide, and thank you so much for joining us on episode 2 of our third season of the podcast. Today we're talking about nuclear energy, and this is a topic I've wanted to revisit for quite a while. We've only had 2 episodes about nuclear energy so far. The first one was in our first season, and the second was part of our campfire series, in case you caught that. Today we're going to be talking about nuclear. I'm going to be focusing more on the people in the nuclear industry and not so much on the technology, because I believe many of the misconceptions around nuclear comes from the fact that many people aren't associated with people who work in the industry, and so nuclear seems very far away from regular conversations. And I want to try my best to normalize those conversations, and to do this, we're going to be joined by 2 wonderful guests to guide us into this conversation. Matthew and Amanda from NAYGN, that's the North America Young Generation in Nuclear, and I was introduced to them by the former president of NAYGN, Lee Causey. Lee, thank you so much for connecting us and making this wonderful episode possible. So let's dive into the conversation and learn more about nuclear and the people behind it, and our role it's going to play in the energy transition. Enjoy the episode.
So I'm Amanda Lang. I'm the Public Information Officer with North American Young Generation in Nuclear. I've been in the nuclear industry for almost 7 years. It's what my bachelor's and master's is in. I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison. I went to college in Wisconsin. I interned with Exelon. I interned at Idaho National Lab, and I really fell in love with core design engineering. And so after I graduated, I went to Duke Energy in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I'm a core design engineer. And I guess I really got into nuclear. It was kind of more in middle school. I kind of was learning about electricity and how important it is. So if you think about throughout the world, how much time, especially women, spend doing manual labor like washing clothes, washing dishes, all that kind of stuff. And I grew up with awesome appliances. So I, didn't have to do all that necessarily, but the difference was really electricity. And so I was like, okay, electricity is a really important thing for people to have time to pursue education, pursue other aspirations. And so then I kind of looked at, well, there's different types of electricity, there's different types of generation to get electricity. And so which types have, if we want everyone to have ample access to electricity, we have to consider the kind of effect on the environment. And so nuclear is, because it's very energy dense, it's really a good option there. So that's kind of how I got into the industry and what I'm doing now. North American Young Generation Nuclear, we're a professional organization for pretty much the US and Canadian. We're dominated by nuclear power industry workers. So a lot of people who work at nuclear plants, or I work at corporate, so there's a little bit of variety. But yeah, a lot of nuclear plants throughout the US and throughout Canada. And our goal is professional development, so opportunities to develop our members with skills to be, to energize the future leaders in nuclear, and public information, which is my realm. So we do a lot of public outreach. We go to classrooms. We organize some contests for kids, like a drawing contest and an essay contest. We've done teacher workshops, essentially just trying to encourage kids to get involved in STEM and then maybe pursue a career in nuclear. We also dabble in more, adult outreach and trying to, explain the benefits of nuclear to the public. We also have a government outreach branch where we get involved in policy, and we've spoken on Capitol Hill and visited representatives, that kind of thing, in the U.S. And then Canada, Matt can speak more to this, but they are very active as well in testifying at different hearings and such. So again, we try to provide networking events so that we can have connections outside your company. So, maybe you have a question for a colleague, but you don't have an exact match at your company, then you can go and meet someone else to associate with. Those are really the major ones. We have a benchmarking and career report that has lots of stats, everything from salary to diversity information. So that's another product we put out. But yeah, that's kind of NAYGN in a nutshell.
So my name is Matthew Mairinger, and I grew up in Canada, just outside of Toronto. I studied nuclear engineering and went to school at University of Ontario Institute of Technology. And then after that, I did my internship at a utility, so at Ontario Power Generation at the nuclear station there, and really went straight into the nuclear industry and really saw a gap like you saw as well, where not enough people knew about it, not enough people were talking about it. And I was really concerned about the future. I really thought this was one of the best solutions. So that's why I definitely started to get involved, look for something more. NAYGN, as Amanda said, it's a nonprofit organization. We have over 100 chapters all across North America. In Canada, we have 13. So I'm the Canadian Operations Officer. So really, I try and harmonize what they're doing in the States with what's going on here in Canada. We have a lot of partnerships going on right now. So we're working with Canadian Nuclear Association, Canadian Nuclear Society. We also work with Canadian Women in Nuclear. We just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Electricity Human Resources Canada organization as well. So really, it's to try and go to schools. It's to try and go to high schools as well to let people know more about it. But we also do international outreach as well. So we get involved for the United Nations, for the Clean Energy Ministerials.
Okay, so thank you for that. And Amanda, just before you joined the call, I was just talking to Matthew about how even people in the energy industry, people who know a lot about energy, have a huge gap when it comes to nuclear, especially when it comes to like what the role nuclear plays in, especially in climate change and energy transition as well. So I just want to ask you guys, what was your initial reactions when you got into the nuclear industry? As young people, did you feel like it was something that was positive, or did you just have not any formed opinions or strongly formed opinions at that point in your careers?
So me personally, so again, it dates back to middle school. I was definitely like comparing energy sources. And so nuclear, a lot of people might not know this, but nuclear is carbon free. And so it's really important to preventing climate change. And so in the US, it's about 20% of the electricity, but it's 55% of our carbon-free electricity. And so nuclear is huge if you want reliable, abundant electricity that's carbon-free. If you compare it to like fossil fuels, so natural gas or coal, a lot of that is a huge chunk of our electricity generation. But nuclear is kind of the other large chunk, and that chunk is carbon-free. So then if you look at other carbon-free sources, so then you're comparing nuclear to hydroelectric to wind to solar. And nuclear also has some huge benefits there too in terms of reliability and adaptability. It can be deployed anywhere. And some of the technologies Matt was talking about with SMRs is hopefully we'll see nuclear in very remote locations soon, and on a smaller scale than we've seen before, so that it can support microgrids and that type of application.
So I was a bit later. I got involved in high school. So in high school, we were basically given an open essay that we could just research anything on. So I started to think about, I knew I wanted to go into something math and science related. And I thought, what would be a stable job that could make a difference in the world for pollution, for getting people out of energy poverty, for supplying people what they need. So that to me was electricity. That's something that we're certainly not going to use less of going forward, especially as developing nations get to the developed stage as well. There's so many people without electricity. And then it was just a little bit of research just sold me on nuclear. It's just something that, first off, sounds amazing when you say it's just nuclear energy. It just sounds so impressive to study. And it's so complex, but it's so simple as well. It's just boiling water to turn a turbine. That's really what it comes down to. So for me, it was high school that really sold me. It was electricity, and I thought that was one of the biggest ways to make a contribution to pollution, to energy poverty, as well as getting people the electricity they need. So that's what sold me.
I'm actually glad you guys mentioned energy access, because a lot of what we focused on last season on the podcast was about energy access. So I'm from Nigeria, and a lot of nations in the sub-Saharan African region have very low electrification rates, and there is a large push for different methods, mostly around renewable energy, mostly solar, and to developing microgrids. But there is this huge gap that not enough people are talking about, that's kind of being filled by the fossil fuel industry, mainly from natural gas. But renewables don't really do well when it comes to the development cycle that these countries are in, because most of them are pre-industrial, and they don't have all this big system set up. There's a very large gap in infrastructure and all these things for like accelerated development that we need to stay competitive, because that's just really the case. And it's so fascinating how nuclear is so excluded from the conversation, especially in that region, because it's something that almost seems out of reach. And I just want to get you guys' opinion about that.
All right, I guess I'll start. I think it's just our industry has done a very bad job over the years of just selling the image that nuclear can find these gaps in the developing nations. And I think that's where small modular reactors are really going to fill in the gap. Because like you said, renewables really can't start a developing nation off. If you're trying to get stability in the country and you want to get manufacturing up and going, you can't have it with a source that is going to be intermittent, that may be on, may be off. And if you're talking about grid complexity, adding intermittent sources just makes the grid so much more complex. It's such a harder problem to solve. Even developed nations are struggling with that right now. So that's really where I see small modular reactors with nuclear. Now that they can be modular in design, they can be scaled up. So if you're looking to start small and you want to test them out, you can add additional units. And also now you're not looking at, 1,000 megawatt reactor source, because that may be the entire country's needs at the moment. So you need something smaller. So that could be a micro modular reactor, just under a megawatt, or it could be a couple megawatts, and it's got that scalability factor. So I think in the past, nuclear maybe was not part of that discussion since it had just the large units. But now as we're getting to the smaller scale, as well as having other type of uses that we can have for them. So with the waste heat now, they could be using to split oil. They could be used for hydrogen. It just makes it much more attractive to developing nations as well.
Yeah, so I was going to say the history of nuclear is very political, right? So we developed this technology with atomic bombs in mind. And so then afterwards, we kind of moved towards the atoms for peace. And so how to use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, and that we have this abundant energy source. But it's always been tied to those proliferation concerns. And so I think that has shaped the conversation around nuclear and where it's been developed. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, they kind of have a dual purpose that they want to promote the peaceful use of nuclear technology, but then they're also known as the nuclear watchdogs, right? So they're the ones you see in the news who go in and, say if there's somebody is misusing nuclear technology, right? And so I think maybe that has been why there's always been like a separation between certain nations having the technology and then it not being available for some of those applications. And you were saying specifically the sub-Saharan Africa region. And so I think now we're kind of, especially with the small modular reactors, because it's much more feasible to get it into an area where the grid doesn't exist before. And also, a lot of those are very proliferation resistant. And so by proliferation, I mean somebody taking out the nuclear material and doing something not peaceful with it. So if you have proliferation resistant reactors that don't need to be opened up, they kind of come encased and you're never dealing with the fuel, that opens up a lot of possibilities. And so some exciting stuff is going on. I know in Puerto Rico, so part of the United States, but an island that has never had nuclear, they're looking at, there's a project called the Nuclear Alternative Project. And so they are looking at nuclear there for the first time. And I know the Breakthrough Institute, Jessica Lovering, they have done some talks throughout Africa about bringing nuclear to Africa. So to me, it's kind of an exciting time that maybe this SMR technology is where we really will finally see nuclear more widespread.
Definitely. And just going out to the role of NAYGN, because I spoke to Lee about the organization and about the role it plays specifically for young people inside the nuclear industry. And I'm just so curious, how important do you think NAYGN was important for you guys when you got started in the industry? Did you see that as a good way to make you more aware about the things going on in the nuclear industry? And do you think that plays a part in you wanting to remain in the industry and being so passionate about it right now?
Yeah, so I think NAYGN was originally started because there's this huge divide. It's like a double hump curve, right? So there's a whole bunch of people in like 50s, 60s who got into nuclear way back in the 80s. And then throughout the 90s, nobody was interested in going to nuclear engineering school, right? And so there was this divide in the workforce. And so how do we allow the younger people to come in and still, get involved, do some cross-training, get some knowledge transfer, and give them some leadership roles before the older generation retires? And so that was kind of the premise. And the workforce hasn't changed dramatically. There's still kind of that two big groups, and not a lot of people in the middle. And so for me personally, I know NAYGN was a big influence on my life. It really helped me connect with my peers, socialize with my peers. And through that, I got some interesting opportunities, speaking at NRC meetings. I was never much into public speaking, so that was a big deal in my mind. It gives you a safe space to practice your leadership skills. And really, yeah, you're right. Like it kind of, if you're going to go out and talk to a classroom or talk to a group of adults, you have to be on top of the nuclear issues, right, of the day, because you might get questions on that. So it's a good way to stay involved.
Yeah, and my experience with NAYGN, so I started when I was just starting full-time at the nuclear station, and they hire us in batches of young professionals. So they hired, I believe it was 41 of us, all engineers all at once. So we, definitely wanted to connect. We definitely wanted to stay involved. So we joined curling teams together. We joined the workplace softball teams together. But really what I saw NAYGN with was it hit so many different boxes. So there's there's the networking side. So we would have Blue Jays games that we'd go to, we'd have mixers, we'd have all these different types of events where I got to other young people, and not even just from my company, but from other sections, from other companies. And that was just such a great experience, just to have fun after work, but also to connect with other people. And I've still kept in touch with quite a few of them, or if something comes up at work at their company, then I reach out to them. It's such a small industry. But then I also wanted to get involved with community service. So through NAYGN, we would do our food drives, we do our charity events, we would do all these different things. So that fulfilled that giving back to the community. For networking, we ran lunch and learns, and we had facility tours. And just like Amanda said, doing the commission hearings for the CNSC, going to the United Nations, doing reports through all these different groups, it's just such a direct avenue to make change happen. So I just found it was, it's just the best way to accelerate your career and to make a difference rather than wait until you're in senior leadership in your company. You can just get involved right away from a young age. And you have the organization that just gives you so many different opportunities. There's so much partners throughout the nuclear industry. We're partnered with the government of Canada. We're partners with the American government as well. So we're recognized through that. We're trying to get nonprofit status with the United Nations. So like I said, it's a preset pathway to make a difference.
And just going back to the point that Amanda mentioned, I think she called it the double hump curve about the age divide in the nuclear industry. Do you think that is still something that is still the case? Because even now, there's a lot more conversations than usual about energy. I think most of it is motivated through the climate change movement and how much more young people are getting into that movement and realizing the importance of it. But that doesn't necessarily translate into more interest in nuclear. So just want to talk about this divide in the age demographic and why people don't connect nuclear necessarily with solutions to climate change from your experiences.
So I'd say right now what we're going through is there's not a lot of young people going into nuclear, but it all depends on which country you're talking about. So some that are starting up a new nuclear program, so the United Arab Emirates that are just starting up their reactors, there'll be a lot more interest. But with the political uncertainty of the future of nuclear in Canada and the States, it's really sending a message to people in schools that, okay, maybe this isn't the thing to study right now. That's where SMRs are kind of this new and novel thing. And we saw it in Netflix Decoding Bill, episode 3, where he talks about his startup company and talking about climate change there. So I think that's really our next step, is addressing how nuclear will make a difference in climate change, in fighting pollution, in energy poverty. So it's really, for young people, that's what they're looking for, is something to get involved that's going to make a difference. And I think that's really our next step, is to address that, because the older generations may already connected in their mind with atomic weapons or Fukushima, or they have these preset ideas in their minds. But if we go to schools, if we talk about the opportunities and just how much opportunities there are in the nuclear industry, it's not just nuclear engineers and trades. You have the marketers, we have the social media interactions, we have the communication specialists, we have the lawyers, we have all these different people that are helping out that I don't think people think about when they go to school for.
Yeah, so I think there's, in the environmental movement, there's definitely an old guard and kind of the new energy. So old guard would be leery of nuclear because of the association with weapons. Now, Gen Z, they're coming up. They're very excited. They have the climate strike Fridays and everything. And so I think oftentimes they are much more open to nuclear, but they maybe haven't heard about it as much. So I think maybe the old guard has a bit of a prejudice against nuclear, and then maybe the new excitement and energy around climate change just might not think of nuclear as being that important, or a surprising number of people, again, don't realize that it's carbon free. So they're pushing renewables. And by that, they mean wind and solar. And so a lot of the conversations we're having in the United States on a state-by-state level is, hey, instead of having a renewable portfolio standard, which is, this state is going to commit to X percentage of renewable energy, and oftentimes it's 100% renewable energy, we'll say, I think it'd be better if you put a clean energy portfolio standard. So, you leave that open to hydro and nuclear as well. And I think then that partnership works a little bit better. So I don't have all the answers. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe nuclear is just not as sexy as wind and solar. But I definitely think the math is in your favor. If you want abundant electricity, definitely look at nuclear. So I think we make a great partner to the clean energy movement, and I would love if we could generate some excitement around nuclear technology.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead,
just
Matthew.
to add one more thing to Amanda's. So the EHRC just did a big report with the Natural Resources Canada, where they surveyed 1,500 Canadians all across Canada from the electricity sector. And it was done through Abacus data. And one of the things they found as well was in terms of favorability towards different energy sources, nuclear is just in line with natural gas and just slightly above coal. So it's not favorable even for the Gen Z and the millennials as of now. So that's, like Amanda said, they're more open, but that's the group that we have to target. They're not against it, but they may not just be for it. They may not understand how it can help. And that's where we see Planet of the Humans, the documentary by Michael Moore on YouTube. It's starting to paint a slightly negative view of renewables as well. I don't think enough people have looked into comparing everything for their life cycle impact. So I think as more information starts to get out there about how much land use it is, how much resources it takes, how much energy it can produce, and how fast we can scale it up, because nuclear is one of the fastest ways that a country can decarbonize. I think once people start to look into that, it gets more attention, then we'll start to get the shift from millennials and Gen Z over.
And I actually just want to go back to something Amanda said, that we talking about it, we don't know about nuclear energy. It sounds almost ridiculous that somebody doesn't know that nuclear is a clean source of energy and it doesn't produce carbon emissions. It sounds almost ridiculous to think about that some people actually don't know that necessarily. And I think this also goes into how you normalize conversations around nuclear. I mean, when you have people sharing the same opinion about nuclear as they do with coal-generated electricity, that just shows you that there's a huge gap in terms of knowledge about how these two differs. And when you even go into natural gas and the problem with methane emissions and the leaks and everything, and these just show that there's such a big gap. There's such a big gap into how people think about nuclear and how people talk about nuclear. And most of it is because these are not just part of regular conversations. I mean, most people know about wind and solar, as Amanda says. It sounds like a sexy thing to talk about, but when it comes to things like nuclear, it's almost hush hush. Almost. I don't know why it feels that way.
I think it's just due to the history. I think so many people have such a fixed opinion of it. The Simpsons was out there and it shows, nuclear waste as this goo that's everywhere, these fuel rods that are floating around. And then just the words Chernobyl, Fukushima, these have been closed discussions. So no matter what you bring up, what you start to talk about with the conversation, those were like the game enders. It was just like, okay, I've seen the Chernobyl miniseries, that's the end of discussion. They said it killed hundreds of thousands of people in that documentary. And then when you refer to the IEA, the United Nations reports that say, okay, it was 28 and maybe a couple thousand had an increased risk of cancer, that it's like, I don't want to hear about it. So I feel like we all have to start to say when we meet people, when we go for a first date, when we go meet people in the grocery store, when we meet our neighbors at the cottage, when they ask what we do, we have to be brave, and we have to say, I'm a nuclear energy worker, and we have to be proud of that. Because if they don't know anyone that's in the nuclear industry, they can't ask these questions. They can't ask, what do you do with the spent fuel? How clean is it? How much radiation do you get? That's something that I know. And the radiation I've received in 7 years working in the nuclear industry is less than a couple of flights I've taken. So these are just ways that we can reaffirm confidence in the public, but it has to start with talking to people. And one of the best people that you can actually talk to is your barber. Tell your barber what you do. He listens or she listens, and they cut other people's hair. They start these conversations. But if everyone doesn't want to say where they work, if they're afraid of that, if they're afraid of backlash, we're never going to start to change the opinion. So it's got to start with the individuals. And it could just be saying that they work in the nuclear industry. It may not even have a follow-up question, but just knowing that people work in the industry, I think, humanizes the technology.
That's actually very well said, and I think that is really true, because something surprising is that some people don't know how much of the electricity, especially in North America, is actually generated by nuclear plants. They don't know that the nuclear plants have been operating for years and years and years and years, and they don't know it. They don't hear anything about it because it's just doing its own thing, providing reliable energy, and it's something that they still have negative opinions about. It's almost amazing to think about from that perspective, don't you think?
And that's the great thing is I always show them, it's the app called Electricity Map, and it shows the live emissions and grid makeup of different countries around the world. And, it's color-coded, so you can see if they're high carbon intensity, and you can see at different time scales. So, what was it like at the middle of the night? What's it in the middle of the day? And really, this is where I can tell people that always say that Germany's doing amazing things. I said, no, they just built a new coal plant. They're shutting down nuclear. They're not reaching their climate goals. And then these maps with real-time data can show you where the clean countries are. Like Ontario is 60% nuclear, and almost the rest is completely hydroelectric. It's France that has predominantly nuclear power. And some of the worst ones out there are like Australia, Poland, that are burning heavy amounts of coal and natural resources. So I think to be able to show them the world makeup and then show them where nuclear is making a difference really puts the knowledge in their hands as well.
Amanda, I'm curious what you think about this.
Oh, yeah. Why do people not think nuclear is clean? One of my theories is pop culture. For decades, nuclear has, with the Godzilla, the breathing radiation, the HBO Chernobyl series came out last year, like all of that. And there is, the HBO Chernobyl series, there is some good to it, right? There's some historical factual stuff that's really good. But oftentimes the science is like not exactly explained very well. And so the idea that I think a lot of people find radiation scary. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't feel it, so you don't know when you're being irradiated. And there's so much, I mean, like every show I've seen, all the sci-fi I watch, it's radiation is portrayed in like this really weird manner, right? But really, radiation has been, we have evolved in a radioactive world, right? Like we are being irradiated constantly. We are giving off radiation. When you sit next to somebody, you are irradiating them. We evolved in a world bathed in radiation, right? So it's a very natural phenomenon, and our bodies have evolved to, to deal with it. We evolved to be able to see visible light as part of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, right? So it's not ionizing radiation, but I think there's this radiation was something that we made. It's man-made, but it's really a very natural phenomenon. In fact, so the whole the whole process that Matt was speaking about, that, we use fission, splitting atoms to make heat, to boil water. So even that is a natural process. There was actually in Africa, it's called the Oklo reactor. And so it was several billion years ago, but there was enough uranium and enough water in a certain configuration that naturally underwater you had underground, you had a natural nuclear reactor generating heat, and it would boil off the water, and then it would, there wouldn't be enough moderation, and so the reaction would stop. And this went on for several hundred years. And so I think maybe nuclear got the mysterious, kind of persona from that World War II weapons development, and so a lot of secrecy around it. But really, it's a pretty natural phenomenon. Our sun, if you think about it, that's fusion, that's not fission, but it's still nuclear reactions taking place. So one might say that solar energy is really powered by nuclear energy.
But I think Amanda hit on a good point here as well about radiation. There's this misconception, this misunderstanding that radiation is a form of heat transfer. It's one of the three basic ways. And then there's ionizing radiation. And I don't think enough people know the difference between those two. And they don't even know what radiation does. A lot of people don't realize that food and fruits and other things are usually bombarded with radiation through gamma radiation to sterilize them, to kill bacteria, to make the food healthier, to make it, there's so many different ways, but that doesn't make the food radioactive. So I think that's even another level of understanding is alpha, beta, gamma versus neutron bombardment, and what can make other things radioactive, what can't, and what can be stopped with the layer of your skin versus what needs lead shielding. I think there's this huge misunderstanding there. People just keep using the word radiation. The phone's emitting radiation, but it's not ionizing radiation. So I think that's a big thing that is a misunderstanding as well. It's not helping nuclear.
And we're actually running out of time, so unfortunately, I have to start rounding up. But I actually have kind of like a closing question. Let's say you meet somebody who knows absolutely nothing about nuclear energy, and you have the conversation. What is the one thing you would like the person to walk away from that conversation with you? Like, what is the one thing that you just wish people knew about nuclear that would really help out, just in general, for yourselves, for the industry, and the mission at NYG? And just what do you think is the one thing that you would wish that people will walk away from learning about nuclear when they talk to you or when they see any material about nuclear?
The one message I like to make sure people walk away with is association with carbon-free. So nuclear is carbon-free, just like wind, solar, hydro. So kind of exactly what you were saying, with a lot of people just don't put it in that bucket. And so trying to get as many people as possible to realize that really it should be in that category. And then oftentimes that leads to, okay, well, but I've heard about, Yucca Mountain or nuclear waste or weapons, and so that leads into, okay, like tell me what your questions are about that, and I can kind of walk you through that. But I want you to know, and I want you to leave this conversation with the fact that nuclear energy is clean energy. So that's always my goal. It's not 100% success rate, but that's my goal.
Mine's similar, but a bit different. I would sell nuclear as great for the environment. So I focus on the land utilization. So since it's such an energy-dense source, it uses a lot less land than renewables, coal, all these other alternatives. So that's one of my main things is if you want more forest, if we want to maintain more green space, nuclear is great for that, as well as it uses a lot less natural resources. So since the nuclear station can be there for 60 to 80 years, you just need the initial investment of concrete and steel, and it's just chugging away with 90 plus capacity factors, just generating clean electricity while using such a small amount of natural resources. So since, again, uranium is such an energy-dense fuel, you don't need to mine as much. So you're mining so much less natural resources compared to others. It's great for the environment. And as Amanda said, you're not burning anything, so you're not producing sulfur dioxide, you're not producing nitrous dioxide, you're not killing people through pollution, and you're saving the planet. So that's really what I like to tell people is what, contrary to what you may have seen in popular culture, nuclear is the greenest that we can do for energy production.
Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope you kept an open mind and you learned something new about nuclear. So this episode, I'm going to put some extra resources into the show notes, the description of the episode, just to, if you want to learn more about nuclear, or if you want to learn more about specifically about radiation and the effects of radiation. So there's this episode, a podcast episode I hosted for Heads of Nuclear that I highly recommend, about radiophobia, which is the fear of radiation and how that kind of plays into how people perceive the nuclear industry. And yeah, so I encourage you to learn some more. If you want to reach out to Matthew and Amanda, just email us. We'll get you connected. And yeah, I hope we see you again on next week's episode. Have a lovely day, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. Oh, before I forget, if you like the episode, please share with a friend, leave us a rating, a review, follow us on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at The Energy Talk everywhere. Just a minute sharing the episode with a friend or colleague could help us out massively, especially if you leave a review. So thank you again. So that's it. Have a lovely day and see you next week.